Welcome to Unholy Inquiry, where each tale leads you deeper into a labyrinth of mystery waiting to be uncovered. This time, join us as we delve into how Poirot exposed a killer's secret life. A fan-crafted story that pays homage to the genius and sophistication of Agatha Christie's iconic detective, Hercule Poirot. We are thrilled to have you with us on this captivating journey. Share your thoughts, let us know where you're tuning in from, and if you spot any details we missed, your feedback is invaluable. Together, let's continue to shape even more thrilling enigmas. Chapter 1. The Letter She Shouldn't Have Opened. The ink had barely dried on the paper when the screaming began. It wasn't a scream of terror, not quite. It was sharper than that, ripped from the lungs like paper, tearing through silence, echoing down the halls of Ravensbrook Estate with a kind of violence that made even the ancient grandfather clock pause in its eternal tick-tock. Poirot's moustache twitched ever so slightly. He had heard many cries in his time, of grief, of rage, of performance, but this was the sound of a truth breaking through skin. Lady Vivian Morley stood in the drawing room, trembling. One gloved hand clutched around the edge of the letter. The envelope had torn at the corner, as though it had been yanked open with desperation. A thin sheet of cream stationery now floated to the Persian carpet, its elegant blue ink scrawled in sharp, panicked strokes. Poirot, seated nearby in a velvet armchair, took in the entire scene, without rising. He did not need to. His little grey cells had already begun their work. "Madame," he said gently, "I must inquire, was it your name on the envelope?" She didn't answer right away. Her breath came in short, gasping pulls. "No," she whispered at last. It was addressed to my husband." "Ah." Poirot folded his hands over his cane. "Then, if I may be so bold to suggest, it was indeed a letter you should not have opened. The letter would be the first stone, the one tossed into a still, deceptive pond, sending rings of chaos through the well-manicured facade of Ravensbrook. Within hours, Inspector Japp would arrive with grim certainty. Within days, the estate would be sealed, questions unfurled like old drapes, and everyone's polite masks would begin to fray. But the murder hadn't happened yet. Not officially. It would come, and when it did, Poirot would already be waiting in its shadow. The letter itself was short, 6 lines, a name, a date, a phrase scrawled in the bottom corner in handwriting not meant to be recognized. He never stopped, and neither will I. And above all else, the name, Rebecca Langley, scratched like a ghost from the past. Vivian's husband, Lord Charles Morley, entered moments later with a stiff glass of brandy in one hand and a golf scorecard in the other. He was flushed, as usual, with the smug satisfaction of a man who believed the world was a manageable game. "What's all this, then?" he barked, blinking at his wife. "Vivian, are you unwell?" "She read your letter, mon ami," Poirot said smoothly. Charles's hand clenched around the tumbler. "Did she?" "Indeed," Poirot went on, "but perhaps we might speak in private before the staff begin to whisper." Charles looked from Poirot to the trembling woman, then down at the scattered paper like it was a viper on the floor. He didn't pick it up. Instead, he said, "Fine. Yes, let's go to the library." And so it began. 3 days later, Charles Morley was dead, shot once through the chest in the library, the same room where he had last spoken to Poirot. The gun, an heirloom flintlock normally mounted above the fireplace, had been found beside his outstretched hand. Suicide, Jap had muttered. But even he didn't believe it. No powder burns, no note. And he was due to give a speech at the Chancellor's dinner in 2 days. Doesn't smell right to me. Non, Poirot murmured. It smells of fear. Jap snorted. You can smell fear now. Poirot gave him a mild look. When it has lingered in a room long enough, yes. There were 3 people in the house the night Charles Morelly died, aside from the usual house staff, all of whom Poirot had already dismissed with surgical precision. He had taken particular note of the scuff marks on the hallway floor, one broken cufflink near the library door, and a tea tray, moved slightly askew. 3 suspects. The first, Lady Vivian Morley, the wife. Elegant, composed, emotionally fragile. The kind of woman who'd learned to cry behind locked doors. She had motive, perhaps jealousy over the mysterious Rebecca or fear of being replaced, but her alibi was airtight. She had been on the telephone with her sister in London at the exact time the shot was fired. Still, Poirot had noted how she'd gone pale at the mention of the word Langley. The second, Miles Davenant, the estate's solicitor and Charles's lifelong friend. Stoic, unflinching, and terribly dull, except when Poirot asked him about a curious payment made to an anonymous bank account in Geneva. Miles's hands had trembled just once, and Poirot had seen how he stared at the letter, left now in a sealed evidence bag, as if it had teeth. The third, Elise Brent, the maid. Young, observant, too quick to blend into the wallpaper. Poirot had caught her staring at Lady Vivian's jewelry box when she thought no one was watching. He had also caught her crying behind the greenhouse, clutching a locket engraved with the name R.L. Each one claimed ignorance. Each one lied, at least a little. But it was Elise who cracked first, not under pressure, not with accusations. But when Poirot offered her a cup of warm tea and asked softly, "Tell me, mademoiselle, when did you last see Rebecca Langley?" She dropped the cup, and everything with it. "She was my sister," Elise whispered. "Rebecca, she worked here before I did, years ago. She and Lord Morley, they had something until she disappeared." "Disappeared?" "She left, or so they said." Elise's voice broke. "But she wouldn't have left me. She was all I had." "Oui," Poirot said, leaning in. "And now, mademoiselle, you are all she has." The twist came not from Elise, but from Miles Davenant. Poirot found the second letter inside the hollow of the C. Flintlock's mount, hidden behind a loose panel. The paper smelled of tobacco and desperation. It was a confession of sorts, but not of murder, of blackmail. Charles had paid someone to keep Rebecca's name buried, someone who had found out about her death, or rather her disappearance, and threatened to reveal it. But Charles hadn't been the one to kill her. He had loved her. So who had silenced Rebecca? Poirot confronted Miles in the study as the storm outside cracked open the sky. "You knew she was buried in the East Garden, beneath the old rose bushes. The gardener was paid off, yes?" Miles said nothing. "You were in love with Vivian, were you not? Even before she became Lady Morley." Still nothing. "It was not jealousy, but loyalty," Poirot concluded. "You killed the girl to preserve a marriage, a name, a title." Finally, Miles spoke. "She was going to ruin everything. Charles was about to confess. He said he didn't care anymore. Said he wanted to start over. I couldn't let that happen. And so, to keep the lie, you killed again." This time, Miles did not deny it. He betrayed everyone to protect her, but not me. Never me. Poirot turned away, the rain tapping like secrets against the window pane. "Ah, mon ami," he said softly, "it is not the dead who haunt us most, but the promises we broke before they could." Later that evening, as the constables led Miles away in cuffs, Lady Vivian sat alone in the drawing-room, the letter folded neatly in her lap. Her hands no longer trembled. Poirot stood beside her. "You knew it was her handwriting." "Yes," she said. "Even after all these years, I knew." "And yet you read it." Vivian looked up at him, eyes hollow. "Because I wanted to know if he still loved her." Poirot bowed his head slightly, as though mourning something not quite visible. Outside, the storm had passed. But within the walls of Ravensbrook, the scent of secrets still lingered. And in the hush before dawn, Poirot whispered to himself, "There is no tragedy so complete, no betrayal so elegant, as that which begins with love and ends with silence." Chapter 2. A glove found in the wrong room. The fire had gone out, but the scent of something burning still lingered in the room, sweet, acrid, unnatural. Inspector Japp's boot scraped against the marble hearth as he turned toward Poirot, holding up the lone item in question like it were a fragment of a crime itself. "We found this in the conservatory," he muttered, pinching the delicate wrist between two fingers. "Left-hand glove, suede, expensive, women's." Poirot didn't answer. Immediately, he leaned in, peering at the glove as if it were whispering something only he could hear. The morning sun filtered in through the stained glass window above the piano, throwing fractured reds and blues across the floor. Somewhere deep in the house, a grandfather clock struck 9. 1, 2, 3. "This room," Poirot murmured, "is not where the glove belongs." "It's a glove, Poirot, not a body." "Just so," Poirot replied, plucking the glove carefully from Japp's hand. "But gloves, mon ami, are like secrets. They are made to conceal." The murder of Lord Charles Morley, though wrapped up neatly in the public eye as a tragic suicide, had already begun to unravel beneath Poirot's scrutiny. Charles had been shot once in the chest, the weapon conveniently found near his lifeless hand. But there had been no powder burns, no suicide note, no signs of despair in his daily routine. Instead, there was only silence, a calm, curated stillness, too neat for the chaos of a man taking his own life. Now, a glove had turned up in the wrong part of the estate. Not the drawing-room, not the cloakroom, but the conservatory, off-limits during the renovation and thick with dust, save for a single trail of footprints and the faintest scent of jasmine. "Do we know who it belongs to?" Japp asked. Poirot's eyes flicked toward the wide bay window, where Lady Vivian stood in silhouette, her posture stiff, her hands folded behind her back. "I have a guess," Poirot said softly, "but I prefer proof." There were 3 guests at Ravensbrook who remained after the tragedy, 3 souls tethered to the house in ways no one admitted aloud. Lady Vivian, of course, poised, bereaved, yet curiously composed. Miss Odette Marston, a young socialite whose charm was matched only by her vanity, and whose father had once lost a fortune in a failed venture led by Charles Morley. And finally, Mr. Edgar Lang, Charles's cousin from the coast, recently arrived under the pretense of managing the family estate's legal affairs. Each had a reason to mourn. Each had a reason to hate. Poirot approached Lady Vivian first. The conversation began with civility, tea, condolences, and the polite fiction of grief. But he watched her hands. She never reached for the teacup, She wore gloves, matching ones, both hands. "Forgive me," Poirot said gently, "but I must ask, did you misplace a glove recently?" "No," she said, without hesitation. "No left glove. Suede, burgundy." Her breath caught, almost imperceptibly. "I haven't worn burgundy in years." Poirot nodded. "And yet, there is a hint of it still clinging to the chair in the music room. A little shadow of colour on the armrest. You must forgive me, madame. My eyes, they see the small things." Her smile strained. "You always do, Monsieur Poirot." Next was Miss Marston, who greeted Poirot in the rose garden, a parasol perched over her shoulder like a weapon, disguised in silk. She wore bright yellow, an unflattering choice for mourning, but her eyes held calculation. "I heard you found something," she said casually, as if Poirot's visits were merely opportunities for gossip. "A glove," he replied. She shrugged. "Not mine. I wear lace. Suede makes me itch." "Ah," Poirot said, stepping closer. "But your perfume, mademoiselle, it is jasmine, yes?" Her gaze flicked downward. "Is that important?" "Everything is important," he replied. And lastly, Edgar Lang, a thin, bookish man with a voice like rustling paper and an affinity for nervous tics. Poirot found him alone in the study, flipping absently through an atlas he clearly wasn't reading. "You knew Rebecca Langley," Poirot said without preamble. Lang's hand froze. "That name again. Why does everyone keep asking about her?" "Because, Monsieur Lang, she is the shadow behind every step we take." Lang's brow furrowed. "She died years ago." "No," Poirot said, softly. "She vanished." "There is a difference." Lang hesitated. "Charles wanted to tell the police, but Vivian begged him not to. Said it would ruin the family. She didn't even like Rebecca." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Then why keep her secret?" Lang didn't answer, but his fingers twitched, just slightly, toward the piano, where a photograph rested. It was small, in silver frame. A girl. Rebecca, no doubt. Her eyes were unmistakable. "You knew her better than you admitted," Poirot said. Lang exhaled slowly. "She was my sister. Illegitimate. Charles was going to acknowledge her. Give her part of the inheritance. I stood to lose everything." "And yet," Poirot said, walking away, "you remained." In the dead of night, Poirot returned to the conservatory. He moved slowly, careful not to disturb the dust. The moonlight filtered through cracked glass panels, pooling silver light onto the stone floor. And there, beneath the broken potting bench, he found the match, the right-hand glove, torn at the wrist. Fresh soil clung to the fingers. Someone had buried something recently. Jap joined him minutes later, lantern in hand. Together, they dug into the flower bed near the far wall. 10 inches down, the spade hit something hard. Not a body, a box. Inside, letters, dozens of them. From Rebecca Langley, addressed to Charles, to Vivian, even one to Odette. "Blackmail?" Jap asked. Poirot shook his head. "No. Warnings? Please." At the very bottom of the box was a single pressed rose, wrapped in the burgundy gloves match. Back in the drawing room, Poirot summoned all 3 guests. "I will not keep you in suspense," he said calmly. "The glove, found in the conservatory, so far from its rightful place, is a puzzle piece, but it is not the first." He turned to Lady Vivian. "You hated Rebecca because she reminded your husband of who he once was. But you didn't kill him. You lacked the nerve. You had motive, but not movement. You were on the telephone when the shot was fired. Poirot then turned to Odette. You, mademoiselle, are not a fool. You saw the box buried weeks ago. You knew what it meant, and you remained quiet. But you are not a killer. You are a coward. There is a difference. And finally, his gaze fell upon Edgar Lang. Ah, Monsieur Lang, he said with grave softness, your betrayal was not of blood, but of fear. You killed Rebecca when she threatened to expose your father's dealings. But Charles forgave you. Until last week, when he found the locket and confronted you. Lang's face turned grey. It was an accident. No, Poirot said coldly. You wrapped his hand around the gun. You staged it. But you forgot the gloves. Lang looked as if he might speak, might beg even, but Poirot raised a hand. It is finished. Outside, the wind stirred the hedges. A bell rang in the village, slow and sombre. Jappy took Lang away, silently, and Poirot stood alone, once more, by the fireless hearth, the glove dangling from his fingers. Murder, he whispered, is not committed in the moment of violence. It is born in cowardice, raised in silence, and clothed, like the hand, in something deceptively soft. He dropped the glove into the fire. This time, it burned. Chapter 3. He lied about the night train. The scream did not come from inside the house. It came from the station, where fog rolled over the tracks like breath from the mouth of something ancient and waiting. A porter found the body, not on the platform, but in the luggage car of the 2:15 from Paddington, its door left ajar in the silver pre-dawn. The corpse was half-folded between two trunks, slumped like forgotten cargo. A gentleman, distinguished coat, expensive boots, blood drying like rust around his temple, no wallet, no papers, only a torn train ticket clutched in one stiff hand, and in the other, a cigarette case with a single word etched inside, Morley. By the time Poirot arrived, the station was already crawling with policemen and anxious whispers. Rain had begun to fall, just enough to blur outlines and distort certainty. A body on a train. How ordinary in a world that liked its mysteries with motion. But Poirot's instincts ticked like a pocket. Watch, steady, deliberate, unblinking. Identify the man yet? He asked Inspector Japp as the latter squinted over a notepad, dripping in his trench coat. Name's Ernest Caldwell, junior partner at Morley and Finch Solicitors. Young, quiet type. No enemies on record, no debts, just dead. And this. He held up the cigarette case. Poirot turned it over, thumb brushing the smooth silver. Odd, he murmured. Caldwell worked with Charles Morley, n'est-ce pas? Did, Jappy. Corrected. Past tense. Then the past, it appears, is not finished with us. The porter, who'd found the body, swore up and down that the man wasn't there when the train left the city. Must have been placed inside at a later stop, he muttered, or maybe crawled in himself. Dead men do not crawl, Poirot said simply, but liars do. The first crack in the timeline came from a seemingly unrelated detail, a hotel register in London. Caldwell had signed in 2 nights ago under his own name, requesting a wake-up call for the 11 o'clock night train to Dover. Yet the train he died on, the 2:15, was outbound, headed west, not south, not east, not toward escape, but toward something, or someone. Japp, frustrated, puffed on a soaked cigarette. Someone's lying. Maybe Caldwell himself. No, Poirot said. Someone lied about Caldwell, and more importantly, someone lied to him. 3 names appeared on Poirot's list, each drawn to the orbit of the dead man like moths to a lantern, each connected, however faintly, to the unraveling threads left by Charles Morley's death. First, Mr. Martin Finch, Caldwell's senior partner, distinguished, well-spoken, impeccably dressed. He was the face of the firm now, carrying the weight of its reputation like a medal he never earned. When asked about Caldwell, he sighed as though speaking of a distant cousin rather than a colleague. Ernest was dependable, timid perhaps, but meticulous, a boy who knew how to follow orders. And did he? Poirot asked quietly. Always follow? Finch hesitated. He asked too many questions lately, about Charles' estate, about some old letters locked in the vault. I told him to let sleeping dogs lie. Yet, Poirot said, rising slowly, it is often the dog that bites which remains silent longest. Second, Clara Penrose, the firm's secretary, late 20s, a face that revealed nothing, even when tears threatened. She insisted she hadn't seen Ernest since the morning before his death. I heard he went to visit a client in Bath, she said. Do you know which train he planned to take? She blinked. Yes, the 11 o'clock night train to Dover. He said he had family there. Poirot leaned in, voice like silk slicing paper. And yet, mademoiselle, he was found westbound, not east. He lied to someone, perhaps to you? Her composure fractured then. I didn't know. Maybe he changed his mind. Or maybe, Poirot said, someone changed it for him. The final name was one that should not have reappeared but did, like a forgotten card turned over in a game. Elise Brent, the maid. She was no longer at Ravensbrook, but had taken a post in the city after Charles's death. Poirot found her in a boarding house, pale and distant. I told Ernest not to go, she whispered. He said he had something that would break everything open. Something about Rebecca. Something about a letter Finch swore never existed. You knew him, well? A small nod. He was kind to me. He said Charles didn't kill himself. He said the glove wasn't the only thing misplaced. The rain outside the boarding house beat harder. The words "not the only thing misplaced" echoed through Poirot's mind like a warning. The breakthrough came from a detail only Poirot would observe. In the train log, recorded without thought by a sleepy station master, a brief, unscheduled stop at Darnley Hollow, 5 minutes. No reason given. It was there, Poirot concluded. The body was placed. Someone who knew Ernest. Someone who knew which car would be least checked. Someone who needed him silenced. Finch had an alibi. Dinner with 2 judges and a bishop. Clara had been home, verified by neighbors. Elise had not left her boarding house. But one thing didn't fit. Finch's alibi was iron, but it was too clean, too prearranged. When Poirot investigated the dinner, he discovered Finch hadn't spoken to any of them. He'd sat, silently, distant, nervous, and afterward he'd excused himself early, claiming illness. Poirot asked the waiter what Finch had eaten. The man frowned. Just water, no wine, no food, seemed distracted, kept checking his pocket watch. And the time? Left just before 11. Poirot's mind ticked forward. The 11 o'clock train Ernest was supposed to be on. The final twist came when Poirot returned to the firm's vault, requesting access to the client files. Morley had sealed prior to his death. Finch, cornered but still composed, complied. Inside, letters, dozens, all addressed to Charles from a single name, Rebecca Langley. Not threats, not blackmail, apologies. Rebecca had not died. She had fled, pregnant, terrified. She had returned, seeking peace, only to vanish again. And now Ernest Caldwell had found her. Her signature was on the hotel register in Dover, the same date as Caldwell's supposed arrival. But he never arrived. Finch knew, Poirot said aloud in the echoing marble vault. He knew Rebecca had returned. Ernest went to her, and you followed. Finch didn't blink. He was going to turn everything upside down. Charles was protecting her, but Ernest, he wanted it in the open. He wanted her name cleared. He wanted justice. Poirot finished. Finch's voice cracked. For a woman who didn't want it. And so you silenced him. And lied. About the train. About the dinner. About everything. Finch turned away. You can't prove I killed him. Poirot lifted the torn ticket. But Ernest can. Later, as Finch was led away, the rain finally stopped. Poirot stood at the train station where the fog had first curled and said softly, The truth, like the train, always arrives, whether we are ready or not. Chapter 4. The Widow Who Knew Too Much. The teacup shattered before she even screamed. Not from her hand, but from the mantel, where it had been perched for days like a forgotten relic. It leapt and crashed as if something unseen had thrown it, and in that same breath the widow gasped. A sharp, shallow sound like a secret escaping before it could be swallowed. Poirot turned in time to see her retreating from the hearth, one gloved hand pressed to her chest, the other trembling at her side. Her eyes were not fixed on the cup, but on the photograph above the fireplace. A man in military dress, frozen in sepia, watching her from a frame slightly askew. My husband never liked that cup, she whispered. Said it reminded him of something best left buried. Poirot said nothing at first. He merely stepped forward and tilted the frame gently back into place. Ah, Madame Whitcomb, he murmured, the dead have a way of speaking when the living cannot. She looked away. The widow's home was warm, modest, but humming with tension that no fabric or fragrance could mask. Poirot had been summoned not for a murder, not officially, but because of a letter, one received in secret, one she had not shown to the authorities. A letter that claimed her late husband, Major Arthur Whitcomb, had been killed, not by accident in the field as reported, but by design, and not during the war. 2 months ago, the Major's body had been discovered at his estate in Surrey, found slumped over his desk with a pen in hand and a note half written beside him. For the shame I cannot undo, it read, Forgive me. The police had closed the matter quickly. Suicide, they said. War guilt. Shadows too deep to bear. But his widow had not believed it. And now, Poirot was here. She offered him a second cup of tea. He declined politely, and instead, he requested to see the study. It was untouched, precisely as it had been found. The desk still bore the faded rings of whiskey tumblers, the blotter still held a faint imprint of the Major's final letter. But Poirot noted the pen, an expensive Mont Blanc, rested perfectly parallel to the edge of the desk. A man who takes his own life in despair does not worry about symmetry. He also noted the curtain cord, slightly frayed at the end. The clock on the wall, frozen at 9:47 p.m. The drawer that didn't close completely. In that drawer, beneath folded documents and regimental photographs, he found something that made his mustache twitch, a small velvet box. Inside it, a woman's locket. No picture, but a single initial etched inside, E. He turned to the widow. Madame, he said, did your husband keep secrets? Her face changed. Just a flicker, but enough. All men do, she said softly, especially from their wives. Poirot smiled sadly. And yet some secrets are shared, just not with words. The investigation began quietly. Poirot visited those who had known the Major best. 3 names emerged, each tethered to him by duty, loyalty, or resentment, each hiding something. The first, Colonel Horace Bexley, the Major's commanding officer and longtime friend. Stoic, silver-haired, and with a stare like polished steel. He met Poirot in his study, surrounded by medals and silence. Arthur was a fine man, Bexley said. A little too idealistic for the world we came back to, perhaps, but I never doubted his loyalty. You served together, overseas? For 10 years, more if you count the early postings. And you trusted him with everything? The colonel's lips thinned, until I couldn't. Poirot raised an eyebrow, a curious turn of phrase, non? But Bexley said nothing more. Second, Evelyn March, the late Major's assistant. Sharp-eyed, sharp-tongued, and fiercely private. She worked closely with Arthur in his final year, organizing correspondence and legal affairs. She greeted Poirot with suspicion. "Why are you here?" she asked bluntly. "To discover the truth, mademoiselle," she scoffed. "The truth is, he killed himself, and I warned him that burying the past wouldn't keep it dead." "Ah," Poirot murmured, "but which part of the past, I wonder? Yours or his?" Her eyes flickered. "Both." The third, Samuel Greaves, the groundskeeper, a quiet man with deep-set eyes and hands too scarred for his age. He claimed to know nothing, to have heard nothing, but Poirot noticed his hesitation when asked about the night of the Major's death. "I was out late," he said, "mending a fence near the woods." "Alone?" "Yes." Poirot nodded. "Curious. The Major's study window looks out over that same wood, and yet he never saw you." Silence. The pieces gathered slowly. The widow's locket matched a second one found among Evelyn's things. Same design, same maker. The initial E meant for Evelyn, not some distant cousin, but Evelyn denied any romantic entanglement. "He cared for me," she said, "but not in that way. We shared something else." "What was that?" "He saved my brother's life during the war, gave me a reason to believe in decency again." Poirot did not press her further then, but he made a note. She wore gloves, always, even indoors. At the same time, new evidence emerged. A telegram, crumpled and forgotten in the back of a ledger, dated 2 days before the Major's death. It read, "The widow knows. Stop her before she talks." Sent from an unknown origin, addressed to Bexley. Poirot returned to the colonel. "You knew," he said. Bexley didn't flinch. He was going to expose something. A shipment of weapons misfiled. A few bribes taken under pressure. Nothing treasonous. Just war-born mistakes. "And he told his wife?" Bexley nodded slowly. She was pressing him to confess, to cleanse his conscience. Poirot stood, and that was inconvenient. She left him no peace. "No," Poirot said. "She gave him no lies, and for that he loved her even more." Then came the night Poirot returned to the study alone. He lit a single candle and waited. Just before midnight, the floorboard creaked outside the door. A shadow slipped inside. Poirot said nothing until the figure reached the desk. "Elise Brent," he said quietly. The woman froze. "You shouldn't be here." "Nor should you." She turned, eyes wide. "You knew?" "From the moment I saw the locket," Poirot replied. "You were not merely Evelyn's assistant. You were Arthur's half-sister, the child of his father's mistress. Hidden, paid off, but you came back, and he accepted you. Tears welled in her eyes. He wanted to name me in the will, she whispered, but Bexley said it would destroy the family name. So he was killed. She nodded. But not by me. I swear. Poirot stepped forward. No, you merely buried the locket, hid the truth, but the killer wore gloves. He turned and saw her, the widow, standing in the doorway, silent, pale. I couldn't let him do it, she said. To give our legacy away, to shame his name, to split what was ours. I begged him to stop, and when he wouldn't, I made it look like despair. Poirot closed his eyes. You were the one who knew too much, he said softly. Not about the past, but about the man. And knowing him truly made it impossible to forgive him. She looked down. I did love him, but love is not always kind. Later, as the constables led her away, the clock above the hearth ticked again for the first time in weeks. Poirot stood alone, gazing into the fireplace where the photograph had once hung. Human hearts, he whispered, are the most dangerous vaults. When cracked, they do not break. They explode. Chapter 5. A smile. Caught in the photograph. The photograph was crooked. That was the first thing Poirot noticed. It hung above the piano in the parlour of Greystone Hall, tilted ever so slightly to the right, as though disturbed by a breeze that no one remembered. Beneath its ornate gilded frame, the keys lay untouched, yet a single note still echoed in the air, high, dissonant, as if someone had struck it in fear and fled. Poirot crossed the room in silence, drawn not by the melody, but by the image itself, a family portrait frozen in sepia, the smiles brittle, the lighting unnaturally sharp. 5 figures. 4 of them looked as if they had been posed against their will, but the 5th, a man in the back, half-shadowed, smiled too widely, too knowingly. It was not the smile of a man at peace. It was the smile of someone who knew what the others did not. That photograph was taken the day before my husband died, whispered Mrs. Lenora Wexley, standing in the doorway like a phantom draped in mourning silk. Everyone says it was a heart attack, but I know better. Poirot did not turn. His eyes remained fixed on the man's smile. Madame, he said gently, what is it that you saw in this picture that others did not? She hesitated. It's not what I saw. It's what I remembered. Arthur never smiled like that, not unless he was hiding something. And the way Thomas, his brother, is standing just behind him. It feels wrong. It always has. Arthur Wexley, a prominent art dealer and collector of rare manuscripts, had died in his sleep just 2 weeks before. The death certificate read, cardiac arrest, with no sign of foul play. But Poirot had been summoned not by police, but by a photograph. More specifically, by the woman who kept staring at it, and by the fact that Arthur's will, revised just 2 days before his death, had vanished from his private safe. There were 3 others present in the photograph, each of them suspects by presence alone. Thomas Wexley, Arthur's younger brother, estranged for years until a sudden reconciliation mere months ago. Beatrice Langford, Arthur's personal secretary, whose inheritance had mysteriously increased from a modest sum to nearly 1/3 of the estate. And Nigel Harper, the family's longtime solicitor, whose hands shook slightly more than they should, and whose eyes darted every time someone mentioned the missing will. Poirot requested the original photograph. Not the copy displayed in the drawing room, but the negative. Beatrice, ever composed, led him to the dark room in the attic, a place that smelled of chemicals and secrets. "It was my camera," she said. "I took the photo myself. And you did not notice anything unusual." She paused. "Only that Arthur asked to see it immediately. He made me develop it that same evening. He looked at it for a long time. And then he laughed, that awful quiet laugh, like he had confirmed something he feared." Poirot leaned close to the developing prince, examining the lightfall and shadows, the curve of each smile, the direction of every glance. "It is often not what is present in a picture," he murmured, "but what should be present and is not, that holds the truth." He began to ask questions, simple ones, but with sharp edges. To Thomas, "Did your brother often speak to you of regret?" "No," Thomas replied stiffly. "Arthur never regretted anything. That was his greatest flaw." "And did you see him the night he died?" Thomas blinked. "No, I was out walking, alone." To Nigel, "When did you last see the revised will?" Nigel coughed. 3 days before his death. He gave me a copy to review." "And then?" "It was gone. He claimed he burned it. Said he'd changed his mind." "Did he?" Nigel said nothing. To Beatrice, "You knew he had a heart condition?" "Yes." "He carried pills." "And were they still beside his bed the night he died?" I didn't check, but Poirot did. In Arthur Wexley's bedroom, the pill box had been moved from the nightstand to the drawer. Odd for a man who often forgot to take them unless they were in plain sight. Stranger still, one pill was missing, but no water glass could be found, not even on the washstand. Poirot asked Japp to request a toxicology report. The response, a day later, changed everything. Arthur's body contained traces of a sedative, unprescribed, unmentioned, and just enough to lower blood pressure dangerously. Combined with his cardiac condition, it could have caused his death. But it was slow, subtle, almost merciful. Murder, yes, but of a most elegant kind. That evening, Poirot returned to the photograph. This time, he studied the eyes, not the smiles, the eyes. Thomas looked tense, Beatrice distracted, Nigel absent, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the frame. But Arthur was staring straight ahead, and his smile was not meant for the camera. It was aimed at someone just outside the lens. The next morning, Poirot gathered them all in the parlor. "The photograph," he said, holding it before them, "is not a memento. It is a confession." They stared at him. Even the widow seemed unprepared for the weight in his voice. "You see, in this picture, Arthur is smiling at someone just outside the frame. Someone he recognized. Someone he did not expect to see again. That smile, it is not of joy. It is of understanding. Revelation." He turned to Nigel. "You were there, weren't you? Not behind the camera, but beside it, watching." Nigel's face paled. "He had rewritten his will," Poirot continued, "to cut you out, because he discovered something about the missing funds, about how Beatrice's inheritance had been padded quietly with his money. You helped her do it, and when he confronted you, you gave him the sedative." Beatrice stood, fury in her eyes. "You can't prove that." "But I can," Poirot said calmly. "In the photograph, your shadow falls over the corner of the veranda, and yet when I asked you about the picture, you claimed to be alone in the darkroom." She faltered. "And as for the missing will..." Poirot lifted the back panel of the photograph's frame and produced a folded paper. It was hidden behind the image. By Arthur himself. He knew he was in danger. and he left the truth where only someone who studied faces would ever find it. Beatrice collapsed into the chair. Nigel said nothing, but his silence was a confession in itself. Poirot returned the photograph to the mantel. Arthur smiled, he said quietly, because he realized, in that moment, who would kill him. And rather than stop it, he made sure his death would not be in vain. A man cannot outlive betrayal, but he can expose it. As the constables took the two away, the room fell still. The piano remained untouched. The clock chimed once, mournful. Poirot, alone now, gazed up at the photograph. "Ah," he whispered, "the camera. It does not lie." But sometimes it takes a man with eyes to see why someone smiles. Chapter 6. The alibi that fell apart at tea. The teaspoon slipped from her hand and landed in the sugar bowl with a soft, traitorous chime. Everyone in the drawing-room turned. Lady Bracknell did not speak. Her face remained composed, but the flush rising at her collar betrayed her. Poirot's eyes did not leave her hands. She had been pouring tea when the name was mentioned. Just a name, simple, unremarkable, but it had cracked her calm like porcelain struck with a hammer. "Forgive me," she said after a moment. The spoon slipped. "Non," Poirot replied gently. "It is not the spoon that slips, madame, but the mask." They had all gathered for tea precisely at 4, as dictated by the Bracknell estate's routine. Poirot had requested it himself, not because he craved biscuits, but because he wanted the stage reset. To see how people sat, who poured first, who watched whom when the others weren't looking. He had learned long ago that the truth does not always arrive at the crime scene. Sometimes it arrives with a pot of Darjeeling and trembling hands. 3 days prior, Reginald Ashcroft, the family's accountant and Lady Bracknell's distant cousin, had been found dead in his study at the edge of the estate grounds. He had been stabbed in the chest. No sign of a struggle, no weapon discovered. A window open to the moors. The official story, a robbery gone wrong. But Poirot, summoned quietly by the family solicitor, knew better. Too clean, too quick, too quiet. 3 suspects again. As always, Poirot liked his mysteries in threes. First, there was Lady Cecilia Bracknell, widow of the late Lord Bracknell, head of the estate, and a woman trained from birth in the art of restraint. Her wealth had dwindled in recent years, and Reginald had reportedly refused to release funds from a tightly locked trust. Her alibi was simple. She had been hosting tea in the garden with guests. Witnesses confirmed. So did the servants. But something had never quite added up. Second, Anthony Vale, the estate's steward. Loyal, severe, with eyes that seemed to count everything they saw. He'd argued with Reginald 2 days before the death about payroll shortages and the disappearance of 2 valuable ledgers. He claimed he'd been checking the south fence line during the murder. Alone. Third, Clara Whiteley, the governess. Bright, observant, young. Reginald had offered her a recommendation for a London position she hadn't yet applied for. She found him kind but secretive, and confessed he had recently warned her to be careful around those who wear gloves when it's warm. She claimed to have been with the children during the hour in question, but the children contradicted her. Poirot's investigation had led nowhere for a time, until the tea. It was Clara who had uttered the name, casually, as if recounting gossip. "You know, I think Reginald once mentioned a Miss Linton, said she was someone he had wronged." That was when the spoon slipped. After tea, Poirot began the dance in earnest. He spoke first with Anthony Vale in the stable. "You were once in the military, yes?" "Yes, sir. Logistics. A precise discipline. I like things tidy." "And how tidy is your ledger now, monsieur?" Vale stiffened. "Missing, as you know." "Curious," Poirot murmured. "One can steal money or one can steal evidence, but rarely both." Next, Clara. She was uneasy. She had not meant to say the name, she admitted. It had slipped. She had heard it in passing. Late one night, when Lady Bracknell and Reginald thought themselves alone in the study, he had begged her for forgiveness. Clara hadn't known why. Perhaps, Poirot suggested softly, because she had once trusted him. And trust, once broken, is harder to bury than any body. Then he returned to Lady Bracknell. She offered him wine. He declined. "You loved him," Poirot said, quietly. "Once," she smiled without mirth. "No, I loved what he could fix, but he couldn't fix me. Yet, you protected him. I protected the name. And when he tried to unprotect you, he threatened to show the ledgers to the board. It would have meant disgrace. And so, I did not kill him. No, but you know who did." The breakthrough came when Poirot reviewed the tea service. Not the drinks, but the cups. One was chipped. The chip had been hidden under a napkin, but it had not been there that morning. The butler confirmed it, meaning someone had slipped. Literally, someone had brought that cup in from the study, the same set. Poirot returned to the study and opened the waste bin. At the bottom, crumpled but legible, a torn corner of a letter addressed to Miss Eleanor Linton. Written in Reginald's careful hand, it read, "I have confessed everything. I will not protect Cecilia any more. Come if you wish, but I will be gone soon, one way or another," and it was signed not with his full name, but with just. That night, Poirot asked everyone to gather again in the parlor. "This crime," he began, "was not about money. It was about shame. A man who kept books too well, and secrets even better." He turned to Anthony. "You suspected he would expose you for theft." Anthony opened his mouth, but Poirot raised a finger. "And to Clara, you feared your name might be dragged through scandal. You knew too much, and not enough." Then Poirot walked to Lady Bracknell. "You did not stab Reginald, but you opened the window for the one who would. You provided the opportunity." He turned, and all eyes followed him. To the butler. "Mr. Cray." He stood, rigid. "You entered through the garden window. You wore gloves to serve tea, not for hygiene, but to hide the bruises from the scuffle. Reginald fought you, briefly, but the knife, silver, from the Bracknell set, was already in your pocket." Mr. Cray's expression did not change. "He was going to tell Miss Linton everything," Poirot continued. "About you, about the child." A gasp from Clara. "Yes," Poirot said softly. "Reginald had a son. Hidden, but not from Cray. He threatened to expose the affair. You saw it as betrayal." "I raised him like my own," Cray said at last, voice low. "Then Reginald decided to play the hero and shame us all." "So you silenced him," Poirot whispered. Cray nodded once. Outside, thunder cracked. The storm had been waiting. As the constables led Cray away, Clara stared down at her cup, untouched now. "It was all over a child," she murmured. "Not money, not power." Poirot turned, his eyes soft but sharp. "It is always about the things we love most, or fear to lose." And with that, the tea grew cold. Chapter 7. she saw the killer's reflection. The mirror didn't break when she screamed. It just trembled, just enough for the candlelight to ripple across the surface, distorting the shape behind her into something monstrous and wrong. A moment before the scream, before the shadow vanished from the glass, a single breath had fogged the lower edge of the ornate silver mirror in the hallway of Langley Manor. And then silence. When they found the housemaid, Elise, she was shaking beneath the coat rack, her eyes wide and fixed on the mirror like it held the devil himself. She couldn't speak for minutes, but when she finally did, it was only 5 words, whispered with the force of a revelation. "I saw his reflection there." Poirot arrived at Langley Manor before the fog had lifted from the moor. He was not called by the police. He was not invited by the family. He came because a woman had been found dead in the conservatory the night before, and the only witness to the moment of her death had not seen the killer's face, but his reflection. Lady Juliet Langley, patron of the arts, widow of a decorated colonel, and owner of one of the oldest manors in the county, had died from a single blow to the head with an antique bookend shaped like an eagle's claw. No sign of forced entry, no missing items, only her body slumped near the piano, blood staining the floor like ink spilled on parchment. A single wine glass sat untouched beside her. Her reading glasses broken, and near her hand, curiously, was a folded program from the charity gala held just 2 nights prior. 3 suspects emerged immediately as Poirot paced the length of the conservatory and studied the positioning of each object as if deciphering a crime scene carved from marble. The first, Edward Langley, Lady Juliet's only son, a failed composer turned schoolteacher who had recently returned to the manor under the guise of family reconciliation. He had debts and more. Importantly, he had anger. Their relationship had always been strained. She controlled the estate, the finances, and in his words, his failures. The second, Miss Miranda Dale, Juliet's longtime companion and nurse, much younger and suspiciously close to inheriting a portion of the estate. The will, though yet unpublished, was known to have been rewritten within the last month. Miranda claimed loyalty, but loyalty can be a veil, and Poirot saw through veils. The third, Gideon Rourke, Lady Juliet's solicitor and executor of her will. Smooth, calculating, impeccably dressed, the kind of man who answered every question too quickly, smiled too precisely, and kept gloves in every coat pocket, regardless of the season. But it was Elise, the maid, who brought Poirot to the edge of revelation with a single, trembling hand pointed at the mirror in the hall. "She wasn't alone," Elise whispered. "I was coming down the corridor and saw them through the mirror. Lady Juliet was arguing with someone, a man. I couldn't see his face, just his shape, tall, thin. He raised something, and then she dropped." Poirot asked softly, "And the face, mademoiselle? You never saw it?" She shook her head. "Only the reflection, and he turned before I could see anything real. But he wore gloves. A small detail," Poirot said, "but very loud." The investigation turned, as all good ones do, on something seemingly insignificant. While inspecting the mirror, Poirot noted that it was not truly silver-backed. It had been restored decades ago with aluminum, meaning the reflection Elise saw would have appeared slightly distorted, subtly reversed. Left appeared right, right appeared left. But to someone unused to such details, it would look perfectly ordinary, unless you were Poirot. Act 2 unfolded like a quiet thunderstorm. Edward Langley insisted he had been in the garden when the murder occurred. He claimed he'd been composing alone, with only his notebook and pipe for company. Poirot examined the notebook and found a sketch, music written with such force that the quill had torn the page. It was written in 6/8 time. But Poirot, no stranger to rhythm, noted the timing did not match the tempo of the composition Edward claimed to be drafting. Miranda Dale had a different alibi. She was reading in the sunroom, a copy of Wuthering Heights on her lap. But Poirot observed that the bookmark had been moved only a few pages from where it had been 2 days prior, based on the indentation of the spine. A light reader, then, not one immersed in a tale. She had something else on her mind. Rourke, for his part, claimed to be dining in the village, a bistro, alone. But the bistro's hostess, a sharp-eyed woman with a steel-colored bun, told Poirot she remembered no such reservation. "Too busy that night," she muttered. "And besides, he always leaves a silver tip. No one did that last night." So, 3 suspects, 3 lies, but only one of them had something to hide about their reflection. It was not until Poirot returned to the conservatory that he found the final piece. He walked slowly along the floor, cane tapping softly, eyes not on the bloodstain, but on the grand piano. The lid was closed, the keys were clean, but one pedal, just one, was slightly depressed. Not enough to strike a note, just enough to suggest someone had leaned on it or knelt. He bent, found a smudge of dark wool and a glint, tiny, of silver, a cufflink. Later, when he returned to Edward, Poirot asked to see his coat, the one he wore that night. Edward hesitated, then offered it. Both cufflinks were intact. "And yet," Poirot said quietly, "you do not wear cufflinks when composing, no?" "No," Edward admitted. "They scratched the keys." "Then why were they on the floor?" Edward blanched. "I don't know." "You do," Poirot said, and turned. He gathered them again in the conservatory. The room had been cleaned, but not the air. "The killer," he began, "was seen, not in the flesh, but in reflection. And yet, reflection is not always truth. It is a reversed truth. And if one does not understand mirrors, one accuses the wrong man." He looked to Elise. "You said the killer raised his right hand, but in reflection, it was the left." She gasped. Poirot turned to Gideon Rourke. "You are left-handed, and you wear gloves not for fashion, but because your left hand bears a scar. From fencing, yes?" Rourke stiffened. "And more than that, the silver cufflink. Custom. Unique. Yours." He stepped forward. "You changed the will. Juliet was going to expose you. She found the inconsistencies, the extra accounts, the disappearances. You begged her to stay silent." Rourke said nothing. Poirot drew in a breath. "And when she refused, you struck her, not with rage, but with precision. You meant to silence, not to splatter, but even the cleanest crimes leave smudges." Rourke turned, eyes suddenly wild. "You can't prove I did it." "But I can," Poirot said softly, lifting a single photograph taken from the hall's security monitor. Not a reflection. Not a distortion. The real you. Gloves, coat, and all. Entering through the side gate just minutes before Juliet died. Rourke was silent. Then the constables came, and as they took him away, Elise whispered, "I thought I saw the killer's reflection, but I only saw the lie." Poirot turned to her, gently. "Non, mademoiselle. You saw the truth, only backwards." He glanced once more at the mirror. "The thing about mirrors," he said softly, "is they always reveal, but only to those who understand what they are truly showing." Chapter 8. The Note Hidden in a Murderer's Book. The spine cracked with a sound too sharp for leather. A dry, papery gasp, as though the book itself had exhaled its final secret. Poirot did not move for a long moment. His fingers, gloved delicately, held the volume at a precise angle beneath the lamplight of the Langford Library. The book was The Anatomy of Guilt, an obscure 19th-century study on criminal psychology, bound in red Moroccan leather, shelved in the east alcove of the Ye Manor's private collection. The pages had not been touched in decades until now, and yet there it was, wedged deep between pages 244 and 245, a note folded into a tight square, yellowed with time, fraying at the corners. He could already smell what it carried: guilt, not fresh, but decaying, and far more dangerous for it. He unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was unmistakably male, small, neat, obsessively controlled. A confession, or the threat of one. "If this book is found after I am gone, know this. I did not mean for it to happen, but it happened all the same. She knows, and she will not stay silent forever. No name, no date, just an initial, M." And suddenly, the air in the library turned still. Not the stillness of peace, but of something holding its breath. The murder of Professor Elias Harwood had left the village of Greystone-on-Thames rattled. A reclusive but revered academic, Harwood had been found in his study 10 days prior, slumped over a desk littered with marked-up proofs of his final manuscript. Poison, subtle, slow. A cup of untouched tea sat beside him, still faintly warm when the housekeeper found him. No signs of forced entry. The room locked from the inside. The coroner ruled it suicide. But Poirot had raised his eyebrows at the report. A man who dies writing footnotes does not plan his own death. And when the note in The Anatomy of Guilt was discovered by Harwood's former student during the library's annual inventory, Poirot was called in, quietly, urgently, and without the police. Harwood's study had not been cleaned. Poirot insisted. Every item was preserved as it had been that evening. Books stacked with eerie precision, a reading lamp flickering with a loose filament, a letter opener positioned exactly parallel to the edge of the desk. It was too perfect. That, in itself, was a clue. There were 3 primary suspects, each with motive, each with something to hide. First, Dr. Miriam Lestrange, Harwood's protégée and editor, brilliant, fiercely loyal, and the last person to see him alive. She had spent years helping him craft his magnum opus on the nature of the shadow self. They had quarreled recently over the final chapter. He wished to publish a theory that implicated a real-life figure in a historical case of academic fraud. Miriam had begged him to reconsider. She claimed she left him that night with a handshake and a farewell. But Poirot knew a scholar's pride can burn hotter than any passion. Second, Arthur Bellamy, Harwood's literary agent, charming, theatrical, and desperate. The professor had been his sole, profitable client for a decade. If Harwood had truly changed his will, as rumors suggested, to withdraw future royalties from Bellamy's estate, the loss would be devastating. He claimed to have been in London the night Harwood died, but Poirot found it curious that his hotel stay lacked any receipts, and his return train ticket was unscanned. Third, Vivian March, the housekeeper. Quiet, overlooked, but not invisible. She had worked for Harwood for 15 years, kept his secrets, cleaned his typewriters, and if whispers were true, once nursed a deeper affection for the man. Her alibi was solid. She claimed to be asleep in the attic room. But Poirot noticed something others hadn't. Her slippers bore a trace of dark residue, identical to the wax polish used exclusively in Harwood's study. The note had changed everything. Poirot began to ask questions. To Miriam, he asked, "Do you often read from the criminal psychology section?" She shook her head. "Never." Elias considered it dated. "Yet this book bore a message meant for someone who would return to it," he said. "Perhaps a former student." Her fingers tightened. "I didn't write the note." "But you recognize the handwriting." She paused too long. "Maybe." To Bellamy, he inquired, "What would you do if your most successful author decided to write you out of the future?" "I'd convince him otherwise." "And if he refused?" Bellamy smiled without humor. "Then I suppose I'd let him choke on his own ambition." Poirot nodded. "And did you?" Bellamy met his gaze, but said nothing. To Vivian, he asked nothing at first. He merely handed her the book, watched her reaction. She froze. Her lips moved silently. Then she whispered, "This wasn't here before. I cleaned this shelf 2 weeks ago." "You are certain?" She nodded. "I dust every Sunday." "And yet," Poirot murmured, "this book has not been moved for years, until someone returned it, after the murder." The timeline unraveled next. The letter Harwood had been reviewing the night he died was not a manuscript page. It was his last will and testament. Unofficial, but revealing. He had decided to name Miriam Lestrange as his literary executor, with instructions to suppress the final chapter. And in a note attached, he wrote, "Bellamy cannot be trusted. His interests no longer serve the truth." Poirot discovered this folded behind a loose lining in Harwood's desk drawer, disguised among rejection letters. Another twist emerged from the study's fireplace, a half-burned envelope. Inside, the remnants of a check. The signature remained, Elias Harwood, but the payee's name had been torn. Only the final letters survived, CH. Poirot smiled softly. "Ah," he thought, "a name abbreviated by guilt." And then the red herring revealed itself. Bellamy confessed. "I wrote the note," he said in a closed-room interview. "But I didn't kill him. I was angry. He'd told me I was out, that the book would be published without me. I came to plead. He wouldn't budge, so I slipped the note into a book I knew he'd read. I wanted to scare him, to make him think someone else was onto him." Poirot leaned in. "And yet, monsieur, the book was not returned to the shelf until after his death." Bellamy's face crumbled. "Then someone else read it." And so the focus turned to Miriam. She had opportunity, motive, knowledge of poisons. Her doctoral thesis had been on Victorian pharmacology. But Poirot hesitated. Something did not fit. She was prideful, yes, and wounded, but not clumsy. The final truth arrived in a glint, a mirror. Not in the study, but in Vivian's attic room, tucked behind an armoire. Framed in dark wood, on its corner, Poirot found the same wax polish that had stained her slippers. And nearby, in a locked sewing drawer, he found the matching bookend to the one in the study, cleaned, hidden. He summoned Vivian that evening, asked if she knew of the book. "No," she said, "not even as a gift. The note was folded precisely the way you fold your laundry, corner over corner, not in thirds." She didn't answer. Poirot stepped closer. You were in love with him. You believed he would never replace you. But then he praised Miriam and changed the will. And in your fury, you did what you always feared he might. She whispered, I didn't mean to. But you did, Poirot said softly, and you left a final signature, not in ink, but in polish, on the mirror, on the floor, and on the cuff of your sleeve. She wept then, not for the crime, but for the years spent unnoticed. Poirot stood, silent. Later, he returned to the library, sat before the book, and closed it. Gently, books, he said, can be homes or tombs, and sometimes both. And with that, the case was closed. Chapter 9. A fingerprint on the wrong teacup. The teacup sat on the silver tray, like a staged lie. Perfectly placed, faintly warm, but entirely wrong. Not for the cup itself, no. The porcelain was fine, English bone china, etched with a delicate gold trim and the Bramblefoot family crest. No, the wrongness lay in what it carried. Not the dregs of Earl Grey at its bottom, not the small smear of raspberry jam along its rim, but the print, a single fingerprint, perfect and clear, pressed against the handle, in a place its supposed owner never touched. A woman who always held her teacup by the rim. Poirot stared down at it in silence. The fire crackled in the hearth of the Bramblefoot drawing-room behind him, but he didn't move. To others, it would be a minor detail. To him, it was the turning of the lock in a door long stuck. Lady Constance Bramblefoot had been found dead that morning. Her body discovered by the maid, slumped peacefully in her velvet chair near the window overlooking the frost-bitten garden. A shawl around her shoulders, a book in her lap, and the teacup there resting atop the side table. Not spilled, not shattered, not disturbed. The scene was too quiet, too arranged. The coroner, a sleepy-eyed man with too many rounds behind him, had murmured something about a heart condition, an age-related passing, but Poirot had seen too many of these scenes, and in this one the silence screamed. He had been invited to Bramblefoot Hall for a weekend retreat, a light intellectual engagement, at the request of Lord Julian Bramblefoot, the late Lady Constance's nephew and heir. What had been intended as a mild diversion, a reading of Poirot's notes on the criminal mind, had turned into a case by dawn. And now, 9 guests remained in the manor, all with teacups, stories, and motives far too conveniently aligned. 3 suspects rose to the surface quickly, as they always did. First, Julian Bramblefoot, the charming yet faltering heir, once a promising student of law, now little more than a hobbyist historian clinging to dwindling finances. He stood to inherit the entire estate, but whispers around the village hinted that Lady Constance had been preparing a change to her will. A new beneficiary, unnamed, sealed in a letter yet to be delivered. Julian's alibi was weak. He had been walking the south grounds, alone, thinking, no witnesses, no tracks in the frost. Second, Miss Amelia Sandford, Lady Constance's companion and reader, educated, reserved, oddly poised under pressure. She had been at the lady's side for 3 years. According to the staff, she knew Constance's routines better than anyone. Tea preferences, medicine dosages, sleeping habits. She claimed she had been in the library all morning, cataloguing the new deliveries, but Poirot noted her gloves, removed only once during the day, and even then with reluctance. Third, Dr. Lionel, Wrexham, the family physician. a man of cold hands and colder expressions. He had treated Lady Constance for her heart condition for years and had overseen the initial inspection of the body. But his eyes had flicked just once toward the tea tray in a way that made Poirot's moustache twitch. He claimed he hadn't seen her since the day prior, and yet he identified the book on her lap without being told its title. A book only recently placed there. A detail that didn't fit. Poirot began his investigation in the drawing room where the murder had taken place. The fire had burned low overnight, and the scent of rosewood lingered in the corners. The tea service had not been cleared. 9 cups on the tray, 8 with the faintest sheen of lipstick or sugar. 1 clean, but for the single fingerprint, on the wrong side of the handle. He turned the tray slightly, aligning the cups with where each guest had sat during yesterday's afternoon tea. Lady Constance had taken hers last, always. She had a preference for the pale green cup with the chip along the base, a detail that Poirot had learned during a polite conversation the day before. But the green cup sat untouched. The one beside her was floral, with a full lemon slice. Another break in ritual. Lady Constance always refused lemon, always milk. It was then that Poirot asked to examine the prints, and when the results came, it confirmed what he already suspected. The fingerprint on the teacup belonged not to Lady Constance, but to Julian, and yet Julian had sworn he never touched her cup. Poirot began his questioning. To Julian he said, "Did you serve the tea yesterday?" "No," Julian replied. "Mrs. Pym, the housekeeper, handled it." "Were you near the tray at any point?" "I passed it. Perhaps brushed it. I don't recall." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "You are a man of detail when speaking of history, yet vague when discussing tea. Curieux, n'est-ce pas?" Julian shifted. To Emilia, he asked, "Do you recall which cup Lady Constance used?" "She always took the green," Emilia said, "without fail. And yet today it was the floral." Emilia paled. "That's not possible." Poirot stepped closer. "Unless someone moved it. Switch them. Perhaps to poison one and not the other." Her hands twitched. "That would suggest the poison was meant for someone else. Or," Poirot said softly, "that the wrong cup was taken by mistake." To Dr. Wrexham, Poirot asked, "What was the last medication you prescribed Lady Constance?" He listed them dutifully. "None of them would cause death so suddenly." "No. And yet she died without a struggle, without a sign, only silence." Dr. Wrexham didn't answer. His eyes betrayed nothing, but Poirot knew. The twist came with a letter, found in the pocket of Lady Constance's robe, unsent, folded once, addressed to the solicitor. Within it, the truth of the new heir. Not Julian, but Emilia. For her unwavering care, the letter read, and for her refusal to ask for anything in return. Poirot gathered the guests that evening in the dining room. The storm outside cracked lightning across the tall windows, and the firelight danced across silverware like blades. The murder, he began, was not planned with elegance, but with haste and fear, a switch of cups, a last-minute decision. The poison was slipped into the lemon slice. A clever choice, as Lady Constance never touched lemon, but someone did. He turned to Julian. "You, monsieur, served the tea. You lied. You reached across the tray and placed the lemon into a cup meant for Emilia. A punishment, perhaps, or a warning." Julian's face darkened. But the wrong cup was taken. Lady Constance reached for it, distracted. Perhaps she forgot. Perhaps she was tired, but she took the poisoned cup and died. Julian opened his mouth, then closed it. Poirot turned next to Dr. Wrexham. And you, Doctor, recognized this immediately. You saw the book, you saw the signs, but you said nothing. Not out of guilt, but fear. Fear that your own history, your prior misdiagnosis, your financial dealings, would come to light. Wrexham looked away. Then finally, Poirot turned to Amelia. You are innocent. The letter confirms it. But even innocence must suffer when lies surround it. She said nothing, just wept. Poirot walked slowly back to the tea tray. One fingerprint, he said, in the wrong place is louder than a scream. As Julian was taken away, rain began to fall. Not heavy, not harsh, but steadily, the kind that seeps into the earth and leaves no trace. Poirot stood alone beside the fire, gazing into the flames. It is always the cup, he whispered, not the poison, but who it was meant for. In that question lies the truth. Chapter 10. The maid's secret changed everything. The maid stood motionless at the top of the stairs, her apron stained with tea and something darker, her hand clutching the polished banister as though the truth had just struck her from behind. Her eyes were wide, not with fear, but the unbearable weight of memory. And when she finally spoke, it was only a whisper, but it shattered everything Poirot thought he understood. I saw her the night before he died. She wasn't crying. She was smiling. The air in Ravenshade Hall was thick with the perfume of silence. That kind of old, heavy quiet that clings to velvet curtains and decaying wallpaper, the quiet of secrets too long buried in parlour walls and letters never sent. Sir Alistair Ferncombe had died 3 nights prior. A man of reputation, wealth, and enough enemies to fill a small ballroom. He had been found slumped over his writing desk, a fire still burning in the grate behind him, and a glass of brandy shattered by his side. The cause of death had been initially declared as natural causes by the local physician. Heart failure, likely stress-related, but something had never sat right with the staff. Something cold lingered even after the coroner's report. And then there was the maid, Lily Winters, 18 years old, barely spoken of, nearly invisible, until this morning, when she had told Poirot about the smile. He did not interrupt her. He only motioned for her to sit, offered her water she didn't take, and asked her gently, "And who was she, mademoiselle?" "The woman you saw." She hesitated, not in doubt, but fear. "Lady Ferncombe." "Ah," Poirot murmured, "the wife." Lady Marianne Ferncombe had been many things, pianist, widow, patron of poetry, but never, not even at her husband's funeral, had she shed a tear. "We mourn differently," she had said coolly when asked. Now Poirot understood that perhaps she had already grieved him long ago, or not at all. There were 3 principal suspects. As always, 3 points to a triangle, never a straight line to the truth. First, Lady Marianne herself, stoic, brilliant, and possessed of a beauty untouched by time. She had married Alistair at 22 and lived under the iron rule of his name for 21 years. Rumours abounded of affairs long past, a secret will, of verbal cruelty behind closed doors. She claimed to have been asleep during his death, and the housekeeper vouched for her being in her quarters by 10, but the piano had been played well past midnight, a nocturne, faint and sad. Poirot had heard it himself from the guest wing. Second, Cyrus Hanning, the ward, a brooding, fiercely intelligent young man, orphaned and taken in by Sir Alistair as a charity case, or so it was said. He had been overheard arguing with the deceased days before the death. The topic? A denied application to a university abroad. Cyrus claimed he had been in the stables, writing in his journal when the death occurred, but his boots were too clean, and Poirot had noticed he wrote not in journals, but on loose scraps of parchment. Third, Dr. Helen Moorcroft, a family friend and physician who had treated Alistair for years. Calm, refined, with eyes like polished stone. She had signed the original death certificate, declared it a heart attack. But Poirot had observed how she flinched when he asked about the brandy, the same brandy she had once gifted Alistair the Christmas prior. She insisted she had not visited the house in the days leading up to the death, but the butler had seen her scarf hanging on the coat rack, and Poirot had found a faint thumbprint on the bottle. Left-handed. Act 1 unfolded like mist on a lake, slow and delicate. The study was meticulously examined. A drop of wax from a candle had fallen onto the corner of the desk. Odd, considering the lamp had been working. A key was missing from Alistair's personal drawer. The fire grate had been recently scrubbed, over-scrubbed, in fact, down to the iron. And in the ash, a fragment of ribbon, deep green. Act 2 moved swiftly. Poirot conducted private interviews. To Lady Marianne, he asked, "Did you love your husband?" "I loved who I believed he was," she answered. "And when did you stop believing?" She smiled without warmth. "When he asked the maid to bring his mistress tea in my own china set." To Cyrus he asked, "Why apply to a university abroad?" "I needed distance from this house, from him. He paid your fees, he fed you, he raised you." Cyrus's voice tightened. "He owned me." To Dr. Moorcroft, Poirot said, "He trusted you. He trusted no one. And yet, he kept your gift on display." Her eyes flickered. "He liked trophies. That doesn't mean he respected them." The maid's revelation changed the course of the case. Lily had seen Lady Marianne slip into the study at 11:23 p.m., not with tears, not with rage, but with music. She had played the piano shortly after, the melody echoing through the silent halls. And more curious still, she had left the door unlocked, something Sir Alistair never allowed after 9 o'clock. Lily had not spoken, because, as she said, "She gave me a coat when I had none. A kindness no one else offered." But kindness, Poirot knew, could be laced with poison. The twist came not in a confession, but in a mistake. Poirot found the missing drawer key in the lining of Cyrus's violin case, not hidden, lost. The boy had tried to steal a letter, something written by Sir Alistair and meant for a solicitor. The contents? A formal withdrawal of support. Alistair had planned to cut Cyrus out. "He is not my blood," it read. "He is my debt, and I am done paying it." But that was not the secret that broke the case. That came from Lily. "I heard them arguing," she whispered. "The doctor and Lady Marianne, in the garden. She said, 'It has to be tonight. Can't wake up next to him another morning.'" Poirot pressed gently, "And you remember the time?" 9:10. I was cleaning the vestibule. The clock chimed as she said it. And there it was. The poison had been slipped into the brandy at 9:30. The doctor, despite her denial, had been in the house. Act 3 arrived in a quiet fury. Poirot gathered them in the drawing room. The storm had begun outside, low thunder rumbling like buried voices rising. "This murder," he said, "was crafted with care. A man died in silence. A brandy spiked with an untraceable toxin. The perfect crime, But what is perfection, messieurs et mesdames, without ego? He turned to Dr. Moorcroft. You had access, you had motive. You saw the will, knew your name was absent, but you did not act alone. Next, to Lady Marianne. You opened the study door. You played the piano so no one would hear the final gasp. You signed the death before he had drawn it. And to Cyrus, you stole the letter, hoping to hide your disgrace. But in doing so, you made yourself suspect. Poirot turned at last to Lily. But it was you, mademoiselle, who held the truth. Not in anger, not in vengeance, but in observation. It is always the invisible who see the clearest. Marianne confessed first. I wanted freedom. He offered only walls. I didn't pour the poison, but I begged her to help. The doctor followed. He was going to ruin me. I couldn't let him. Cyrus said nothing, just closed his eyes. Outside, rain began to fall. Poirot, staring into the firelight, spoke softly. Sometimes murder is not a moment, it is a crescendo, played in silence, danced in shadows. But always there is someone who sees, someone like the maid, the one no one asks, the one who hears, and when she speaks, mes amis, the truth arrives. And so it did. Chapter 11. His real name was never his. The body was found beneath a false name, in a house built on lies, and with a face that smiled in photographs no one could place. It was the butler who screamed, a sound like an animal being gutted, not from pain, but from the shock of seeing someone who had walked the manor halls for 3 years now lying lifeless at the base of the west stairwell, blood pooling beneath the collar of a dinner jacket tailored too finely for a man without a past. He was known, until that morning, as Charles Denham, estate manager to the Grantham family. Reliable, well-spoken, discreet. But the identification in his pocket said something else entirely. It bore the name of a man who had died 7 years ago, and the man who now lay dead in Grantham Hall was not supposed to exist at all. Poirot arrived just after sunrise. The sky was bruised purple and dull gold, as though the light itself hesitated to enter the house. He was greeted not with the usual formalities, but with silence, an oppressive hush that stretched from the drawing-room to the gallery, broken only by the slow ticking of the grandfather clock in the foyer. Lord and Lady Grantham sat side by side, their faces drawn, their hands trembling. The body had been taken away, but its presence still lingered in every corridor. Charles Denham, whoever he truly was, had been living among them under an assumed identity. And now, someone had made certain he would never tell why. 3 suspects immediately surfaced. They always did. Poirot found it amusing how, in any house, guilt collects in triangles. First, Lady Evelyn Grantham, elegant, imperious, and entirely too calm. She had brought Denham into the household herself, 3 years ago, after encountering him, she claimed, during a charity gala in Vienna. Her reason for hiring him had always been vague. A quiet man with excellent manners, she had said. But Poirot now wondered what truly bound them. Evelyn claimed to have been in bed with a headache the night of the murder. Her lady's maid confirmed this, but the fire in her room had not been lit, and the window was unlatched, a detail that betrayed discomfort, not sleep. Second, the Reverend Miles Beck, a friend of the family and frequent dinner guest. Mild-mannered, genial, always quoting scripture. He had taken a particular interest in Denham, often engaging him in private conversations about atonement and starting anew. When questioned, he said Denham had seemed troubled recently. Poirot noticed how the Reverend's hands shook as he poured his tea, and that he avoided looking at the portrait above the hearth, a young soldier in uniform. The nameplate read, Captain Richard Halbert, 1917 do 1936. Third, Miss Clara Drew, the companion and secretary to Lady Grantham, quiet, observant, and far too intelligent to be dismissed as background. She had managed the household accounts with Denham and was the last person to speak with him before his death. She claimed they had parted on cordial terms, but Poirot had already found a note in Denham's desk, unsigned and hastily torn. It read, She knows. I can't stay silent. Tomorrow, everything changes. Act 1, The Crime and Chaos. The evidence was scarce, but the implications were not. Denham had been pushed. That was now certain. A scuff mark on the stair, a handprint on the balustrade, and the angle of the wound, forceful, direct, no sign of robbery. His room untouched. But Poirot had found something under his mattress, an envelope of clippings, old, yellowed, and marked with dates in red ink. All of them related to a man named Michael Roff, a con man, a war deserter, declared dead in 1940 after a fire on the docks in Dover. Body never recovered. And the photo, the same face, slightly younger, less polished, but unmistakably the man they had all known as Denham. Ah, Poirot whispered, holding the clipping to the light. His real name was never his. Act 2. Clues, red herrings, and rising suspicion. He spoke first with Lady Grantham. You met him in Vienna, but this man, Michael Roff, was never in Vienna. His alias was built in London. She didn't flinch. Then perhaps I was mistaken. Non, madame. You are too precise for mistakes. She paused. He reminded me of someone, my brother, who died in the war. Poirot nodded. And so you gave him a second life. To Reverend Beck, Poirot asked, Why did you ask him to confess? Beck's eyes widened. I suspected something about his manner. He knew details about a mission in France, things no civilian should know. And did you confront him? I prayed for him, and someone else acted in your stead? I don't know. To Clara, Poirot said nothing at first. He simply handed her the note. She read it, then folded it silently. I threatened to expose him, she said, not because of the name, but because of what he did. Poirot's eyes narrowed. What did he do? He was blackmailing Lady Grantham. For what? Her brother, Clara whispered. He was not a war hero. He was a traitor. Denham Roff served under him. He knew the truth, and he used it. Act 3, The Reveal. Poirot gathered them in the music room. The fire was lit, but no one sat close to it. Shadows danced along the walls like accusations. This man, Poirot began, was not who you believed. He was Michael Roff, a fraud, a coward, and yes, a blackmailer. But he was also a man who had finally decided to tell the truth. He turned to Lady Grantham. You brought him here not as an estate manager, but as a shield. You hoped his silence would bury your family's shame. Evelyn looked away. To Reverend Beck, Poirot said, he was a ghost. A man risen from the ashes. You tried to guide him, but you failed. And someone else, someone without your mercy, decided to act. He looked last to Clara. You confronted him. You threatened to reveal the blackmail, but you did not kill him. She shook her head. No. Poirot stepped forward. "The killer," he said softly, "was the man who could not bear the stain, the man who saw the honor of the family as more important than the truth." All eyes turned to the butler, Mr. Haynes. He stepped forward, trembling. "I served Captain Halberd. He died with honor. I wouldn't let that man smear him." Poirot nodded. "So you pushed him?" "I did what I had to." Poirot said nothing more. Later, as the constables led Haynes away, the storm outside had stopped. Only the ticking of the clock remained. Poirot stood alone in the hall, looking at the portrait of the soldier. "Names," he said quietly, "are not who we are. They are only what others are allowed to remember, and when they are borrowed, someone always comes to collect." Chapter 12. Poirot knew before the last breath. The candle fluttered as though it too felt the lie in the room. Wax dripped slowly onto the tablecloth beside the brandy glass, untouched but for a single fingerprint pressed faintly into the rim. A man lay dying in the bed behind the partition, but the room was not filled with the smell of illness or loss. No, Poirot knew this scent: regret, burned silk, and something sharper beneath, like almond. The nurse, pale and trembling, backed away from the bed as the man took a rattling breath, and with it, Poirot closed his eyes. He already knew the truth. The murder had been committed long before this final gasp. The dying man simply happened to carry the secret until it crushed him. Sir Lawrence Vey, once a titan of shipping and steel, lay in the upper chamber of his sprawling estate, Briarcliff Hall, surrounded not by loved ones, but by those waiting, not for comfort, but for the will, for the confession, for the truth that only he could give, and which he was now slipping beyond the reach to speak. The doctor had said he had days. Poirot knew better. It would be hours, minutes. A man whose conscience bleeds does not wait long to be taken. 3 were in the house that day when the nurse cried out and the man died before dawn: his daughter, his former business partner, and his nurse. And one of them had killed him, not just slowly, but beautifully. And Poirot had seen it coming, not in evidence, not in words, but in the way the house had grown silent around the man who once ruled it like a god. Lady Isabel Vey, the daughter, stood by the window when Poirot entered. Her black gloves were too clean, her face composed. She had not spoken to her father in months, not since she discovered he was changing the inheritance. But she had returned suddenly 3 nights ago, pleading reconciliation. She claimed to have spent the evening in the library, writing letters. Yet the inkpot had been dry and the paper unsent. "A daughter must be near at the end," she had said softly. Poirot had watched her as she said it, and she had not blinked once. Martin Kell, the business partner, was a man of sharp smiles and slippery timelines. He had worked with Sir Lawrence for 25 years, and perhaps betrayed him for 24 of them. Financial records, examined by Poirot earlier, told a story of quiet siphoning, of quiet punishment. Kelly had motive. Rage and desperation were tools he wore well. He claimed to have arrived only the previous day, but the housekeeper had seen someone matching his description 2 nights earlier, outside Sir Lawrence's study, when the light flicked once and never came back on. The nurse, Clara, was young, too young to carry the burden of this room, but her hands did not shake as she adjusted the sheets. She said she had done her duties, followed the doctor's orders, but Poirot had noticed the bottle of laudanum by the bedside, a bottle half full the day before, now nearly empty. She insisted she hadn't touched it, but her bag carried an old prescription slip, not signed by the doctor, signed by Sir Lawrence himself. Backdated. She claimed he'd asked her to keep it hidden. In case he needed peace, she whispered. Poirot had not accused her. Not yet. The room held its final breath as the doctor pronounced him dead, and yet something lived in the room still, the weight of what was unsaid. Poirot stepped forward, placing a hand gently over the man's now lifeless one. He had spoken only once in the hours before, a single phrase repeated twice, each word falling from his mouth like shattered glass. Too late. Tell her it wasn't her fault. Poirot had heard it, of course, and had understood it before the others even registered the grief. The investigation resumed before the tears were dry. Act 1. The crime and chaos. There had been no signs of force, but Poirot's mind returned again to the moment he'd seen the nurse place the glass of water beside the bed without checking the water level first, as if she already knew it would not be touched, and how Lady Isabel, just after the doctor had gone, had calmly reached for a book beside her father's bed, a novel her father despised. He had told Poirot as much during their first meeting. "I do not read fiction," he'd growled. "I have no need for stories when I have lived betrayal." Poirot studied the room anew. A small vial, empty, had been discarded beneath the mattress. Too small for medicine, it had once contained digitalis, a heart medication, powerful and dangerous in excess, and in the fireplace, a scrap of burned letter, just enough ink to read the words, "I have made the change. She will know." Act 2. Clues and suspicions. To Lady Isabel, Poirot said, "You returned not to forgive, but to watch. You feared your father had undone your future." She said nothing. "Did he tell you what he planned?" She looked at Poirot, cold. "He said I was no longer his legacy, that I was something else." To whom was the new inheritance going? "I don't know." She was lying. Poirot could always tell. Her glove creaked as her fist tightened. To Kell, Poirot asked, "Did you know he discovered your theft?" Kell's jaw flexed. "I suspected." "And did you try to stop him?" "No. He said he'd ruin me." "I believed him." "But you came early." "I was outside. I didn't go in." "But you brought something with you. A letter, which is now ash in the fireplace." Kell blinked. Poirot nodded. "You begged." "He refused. But you did not kill him." To Clara, Poirot said nothing. He simply held up the empty vial. Her eyes flickered once. "He asked me," she whispered. "He begged me to end it. He said the pain was worse than the guilt." "And did you?" She nodded. "I gave him enough to sleep. No more." Poirot believed her, and then he opened the safe in the study. The new will was there. It left everything to Clara, the nurse, because she was not only his nurse, she was his daughter, a child he had fathered years ago in secrecy, hidden, denied, raised in shadow. He had told Poirot the day they met, "I only have one thing to leave behind that matters. A truth, not a name." And that was the twist. Lady Isabel had found the truth, the real heir. And in the silence of the night, she had taken the vial meant for sleep and added just enough to ensure her father never woke. Not rage, not hatred, but cold erasure. She had killed the truth. Act 3. Poirot's revelation. They stood in the drawing room as dawn broke. Poirot laid the will on the table. "He knew before the last breath," he said quietly. that he had wronged Clara, that Isabel would never forgive him, that his legacy was not in steel or ships, but in what he chose to face. And he died trying to undo the lie. He turned to Isabel. You took that chance from him. You killed a man who was already dying. But you did it not to stop his pain. You did it to keep your story intact. Isabel said nothing. Poirot turned to Clara. You have your name. You have the truth, whether you want it or not. She nodded once, tears falling. He said it was too late. Poirot closed his eyes. No, mademoiselle. It was just in time, for justice always waits until it is invited. And with that, the case was finished. But not the pain. Outside, the sun rose behind grey clouds. Poirot stood at the gates of Briarcliff Hall, watching the crows lift from the trees. Names, he whispered, are only powerful when tied to truth. Without it, they are shadows pretending to be men. And in that morning light, the truth remained. Heavy and finally free.